Nakamura. I believe we are live.
Awesome.
So thank you so much for joining me. Adrienne Nakamura, obviously the VP of Strategic Projects at Supplemental Healthcare. I say obviously because I'll tag you on LinkedIn. Everybody will see that title. Really appreciate you joining me today. We were just talking offline, obviously, about what we're going to be doing here, and it starts with me having to navigate to a couple of places to make sure that we're not just talking to each other and think we're talking to other people. Number one, and then I'll be able to, if there are any questions or comments that come through during the time that we're live for roughly the next half an hour, I'll be able to address those. But again, thanks so much for joining. I'd love to have you start by just kind of telling those that have joined us, assuming again that we're actually live, a little bit about your background, some career highlights, and I'll come right back and we'll jump into the actual interview here. So
great. Yeah, awesome.
Thank you.
So my career's been pretty varied. I've been in staffing for a little over 7 years, going on 8. But before that, I worked at American Express, and before that, I actually interned at the AG's office for a number of years. So a little bit of this, a little bit of that. I cut my teeth in project and doing process improvement at American Express, where I got my black belt, did a bunch of work there, started leading some of their operations teams. I worked in prepaid, not in their credit division. So we functioned as close to a startup as you possibly could in a company of that size, right? So regulated, financial, and a very illustrious company with a long history, but we were doing product launches, bringing up new centers, doing things that the company had never done before. So really kind of cut my teeth in that space. And then as I started to move up and look around for opportunities, ended up working at CHG, where you and I worked together for a number of years, helped with their digital transformation, brought up a project management office there, loved my time there, really great. And then I got an opportunity to be the VP of Strategic Projects for Supplemental Health, which is where I work today. I report to the CEO, and I'm doing something similar, bringing up project management for this company, working on some diversity items, and then also working on some of their digital transformation and kind of helping their IT space as well. So kind of dotted line reporting to their chief digital officer.
Very cool. Very cool. Thanks for that. I appreciate the background. And I mean, big reason why I wanted to bring you on, obviously, is the path into leadership and what you're currently doing. So I think let's just jump right into it. We've got a lot of really cool things to cover today. But I'd like to start by asking you, for anyone else who's an aspiring leader in technology, what guidance would you give them to advance their career? And basically, how did, you kind of went through it just now, but how did you get there ultimately?
I mean, if I'm giving advice or thinking about kind of the things that got me to the places I wanted to, or how I learned what I needed to go to reach the next level, it was to watch out for the people that you keep around you and keep an eye on the leaders that you admire. Like if you notice something about a leader, or not even a leader, just a person that they're killing it at what they do, you want to learn from everybody. So breaking out of your own vertical and getting a well-rounded skill set makes you a really dynamic leader. And it'll also force you to network. I know that's not everybody's favorite thing, and it can be inorganic in some ways. But if you watch for the leaders that have a skill or seem to have expertise or are really good at doing something, and you approach them and try and talk to them about what that looks like for them, how they do it, first of all, that person's going to be incredibly receptive, right? You're giving them a compliment. And second of all, you'll learn from them. And if you break out of your own vertical and notice that about other people that aren't just in your function, it first of all, it helps you understand other parts of the business you're working in. And then second of all, you'll learn an incredible amount. So some of my favorite leaders that I've worked with that have helped grow me, I never reported to them. They were just people that I had reached out to talk to understand what they were doing.
Well, and Adrienne, as you know, we didn't necessarily plan to talk about networking, but it is, I'd love to kind of explore this thread a little bit. So ultimately what you've done in your career is network internally at the companies that you've worked at, correct? And it's been other leaders that you've admired from a distance. Is that, am I understanding that right?
Yeah, I mean, the majority of it's definitely where I have the most exposure, right? You spend 8 to however many hours a day at the place you work. I've also volunteered places or work like had a chance to be around other people doing things or leading efforts. Same thing applies. So if I'm going to do work at the IRC, the International Refugee Committee, there are a couple of people there that were doing really cool things on a shoestring budget. And I would watch and be like, I don't get how you're making this happen, and go ask them questions. It had nothing to do with why I was even there. I was literally tutoring refugees on English, but watching something happen that was totally out of my own comfort zone. Same thing, same idea, same kind of networking.
Yeah. No, I think it's such an important point, and just one that, I think I'd love to kind of reiterate, for anyone who's watching, specifically as it relates to that question we started with of how to advance your career and get to leadership role. Start by that networking internally, or to your point, even if it's volunteer work. If you admire what someone's doing, there's so many leaders that want to give back, that want to help, that asking those questions to start the relationship, and then obviously, a guy like me will remind everyone to then try to do your best to stay in touch. That's sometimes the hardest part, right?
Definitely.
Well, so let's stay on the leadership theme and move into, like, for you personally as a leader, how do you approach team leadership and just people management in general?
Yeah, leadership is really interesting, right? Sometimes you might feel like part therapist. Sometimes you might you might have to be teaching some foundational skills that maybe you assumed were there or weren't. But I think no matter what the situation, if you take time to listen and ask more questions and really understand what that person's experiencing, it makes it so that your communication's improved and you can get the result that you want. So if you establish, hey, here's how we're going to communicate, here's my leadership style, what is it that you need from me? Really catering that style to understand you're going to always be the leader you are, and your communication style is your communication style, but understanding what that person needs and helping to tweak it, and then set some expectations so that person isn't off put by you, and continuously having some dialogue around that, I think is really key to being a good leader. I've hired and worked with a ton of different personality types, and I've been fairly successful. And I think it's because I set the expectation of here's how I am, what can I do better? And I actively ask for feedback, which is intensely uncomfortable. Even when I think I have really good rapport with somebody, I prep them and say, look, a few times a year, we are going to talk about what I can do better. And I'm going to send you a note ahead of time, so you're thinking about it. And I'm not just putting you on the spot in a one-on-one, but I think it is key to make sure that you're doing a good job. And I know a lot of companies, they do 360s, and there's all kinds of things that you can do that's an expectation. But the real genuine thing happens when you initiate it, not because your company tells you to or your leader's telling you to, but because you've told that person, look, my intention's to be better and we need to do better together. Even if the relationship is great, doing that check-in, it acknowledges that person's experience, it makes them feel heard, and you'll get things back that you never expected, and it will help you.
It's incredible. I mean, incredible advice. I have to imagine that some of that over time, whether it was leaders you reported to directly, or you alluded to earlier, mentors that you had throughout your career, other leaders that you admired, that you went and actively sought out. So just tell me a little bit more about how you approach mentors, how they've played a part in your career, what the qualities are that you look for, and ultimately how you select those individuals. That's a lot, but
Yeah. Okay. So mentors, how I select them, what I look for. I'm always looking, when I pick a mentor, there are two things that I want. I want someone that is comfortable with me, but that I'm not really good friends with, because I need them to be able to be harsh with me. So my friends that I've worked with a long time, they can provide advice or observations on my behavior based on how they know me, but they're not impartial, right? And there's something to lose. If they offend me and we're friends, then all of a sudden you're putting this friendship at risk, right? So I look for people intentionally that we professionally respect each other, or we know each other, but not that I'm going to drinks with all the time or something, because I feel like all of a sudden there's now something to lose if that conversation goes awry. So I do try and keep it professional. I think knowing my weaknesses, I pick out the people that don't have those so that they can give me really critical feedback, right? Your mentor should be an outside perspective to make you feel grounded. So a couple of my mentors, how they've been key to me, They know that I'll sacrifice some of myself for my team. Like I feel like it's kind of your duty to make sure that your team's taken care of, right? And when I'm going above and beyond and things aren't working out, or if something gets imbalanced, I won't necessarily see it. I'll see it as like, no, I've got to cover that gap, or I've got to fill this thing, or I've got to help this person do this thing. And if I'm working with a mentor and talking about a frustration or a roadblock I've hit, having someone to just check me and be like, why are you doing that, is really key. You have to have someone that's really honest and that's comfortable asking you the uncomfortable questions, so that they keep you grounded and that you're working on the things that you're not great at.
Couple of themes that I took away from that. I mean, there was a lot of great stuff there, but to your point, you mentioned a couple times being uncomfortable and allowing yourself to get uncomfortable. That seems really critical. And I really like the idea about when it comes to selecting a mentor, trying to find somebody that you don't necessarily know already. I think that's that's valuable advice, because for all the reasons you just went through there. So that's great. Okay, so we're going to switch gears just a little bit here. I happen to know this about you from an informal perspective as of this moment in time. You are, my understanding is doing some leadership around DEI at your organization at Supplemental Healthcare.
Yep,
and
absolutely.
So I'd love to understand how you incorporate diversity, equity, and inclusion principles with your team, your company, just how you think about that and how you incorporate it.
Yeah. I think, okay, so a few things there. DE&I, the next letter that's becoming more and more popular is adding a B at the end, so belonging, right? So you can hire, recruit, and understand the diversity, make sure there's equity, include people, and then after you get them into the fold, how do you make them feel like they belong, which is a key piece of how I incorporate it. So the first thing around anything that I look at when I do DEI and B initiatives in a workplace, which I did at Amex, and then I'm more involved here at Supplemental, is understanding some data. So being pragmatic in your approach, understanding kind of current state is really key. I think there is, and I think Scotty, you and I have talked about this when we go to lunch, there's like this black hole of social media, and when you Google and the things that come up, and it's the algorithm that keeps feeding you over and over again, right? And you can get self-reinforced on, well, this is what's important in the great big world. It must be exactly what my company needs. And what you really need to do is look at the data in your company and go and seek feedback. It's really key to understand what current state is in the place that you work before you start trying to do things. So understanding the makeup of your company, if you're working on it company-wide, or if it's your team, you need to understand the makeup of your team and recognize what's going to be important for those people to make them feel heard and seen. You can recruit until the cows come home to get diverse slates of candidates, but if you can't keep them around, what was the point? And being really honest with yourself about if there is a trend in that space is going to be really key.
I love it. I mean, I think, starting with that data-driven approach, it's not, for anyone that knows you already, it will not come as a surprise that you're going to lead with data, but it's very actionable, and I think critical thing that we don't hear about often when we're talking about these topics in the zeitgeist. So that's really important advice, and of course, implied in that is you're then coming up with your metrics to improve, right? So
right, and talking to people and getting feedback, right? You have to talk to your team about why this matters. I think the biggest conversation I've had lately is like, okay, how does diversity help us in all these other areas? There's lots of articles that show you how companies that focus on it versus don't improve EBITDA, improve this, improve that. What does that look like? I think, again, looking at what your company, where the gaps may be, and then starting to measure and understand what does that really look like, and then getting feedback from the people that are living it, that will help you. That's the other complement, right? You go data driven and you look at, okay, here are the populations, the people we have, some of the gaps we have. Let's go talk to those people and see why is that happening? Because if it's just numbers, you're not going to see the full picture. But if you're getting the numbers and then understanding where to start to dig and really seeing where you can make an impact, that's when that's kind of key, that balance.
Very cool. Very cool. There's a handful of people that have joined. I just want to mention, I'm talking to Adrienne Nakamura. She's the Vice President of Strategic Projects at Supplemental Healthcare. We were just talking about her efforts and the leadership that she is exhibiting at Supplemental around DE, I, and B. I'll try and incorporate that moving forward, Adrienne. Okay, so again, switching gears a little bit, you're a person who just knowing you personally, I feel like you've got a really strong business acumen, and but you're also very good technically. I'm curious, how do you balance the two? And what do you recommend for those who might be weighted one way or the other a little bit more to get a little more balance?
Fair. Yeah, I would say generally my business acumen is stronger than my technical expertise. You won't find me coding, right? I'm not building, I'm not an engineer. The way I balance it, I really look at what my role is calling for or what my team is looking for and try and understand what that balance really should be. If I'm leading a really technical team, then I'm going to lean on my business acumen to help balance out what that looks like and make sure that I'm kind of filling the gaps in there and helping to educate. If I have a less technical team that I'm leading for something and they really need to understand the technology piece, then I ramp up and try and go learn what I need to in order to make that effort happen. So you really have to find a balance in the overall organization that you're in so that you know which thing that you need to lean on to help complement what you're doing.
Great. Love it. I think that's fantastic advice. And then how about, these are a couple of buzzwords, but I think it's really important. How do you think about and ultimately foster innovation and experimentation within your team? So I'll just say that the implication there is potential failure, right?
Yeah. Yep. It's about dedicating a space and a time. So I think everybody gets going in their natural groove. They're always trying to do something. And a lot of times it's repetitive, whether that's being in certain meetings, writing emails, creating project plans, coding, whatever that looks like. And as you get into this space of like, okay, here's my cycle, here's generally how my day works. No matter what, somebody's like, this could work better. How am I going to figure out how to make that happen? And most of the time we all just be like, okay, I know there's a better way to do this. I'll figure it out later. What your job should be to help make sure that it's to make sure there's a space for that and to say it's safe. We're going to experiment. You hate how this part of this program works. Cool. Let's figure out if there's something else we can do. Is there a different program we should use? And then dedicate some time to let them play with it. And if there isn't a great alternative and they spent hours playing around with something that didn't work, fine. Bring back that learning, share it with the team, and let's move on. And I think that there's two things that does. One, it encourages people, right? They want to see, okay, there's time for this. They're encouraging it. Great. If it works, rewards and recognition, amazing. And if it doesn't work, still recognition that, hey, we tried. And the rest of the team doesn't feel like, nope, I know there's something there. It's, oh, hey, they tried it. We did these 10 things. It didn't work. I'm not going to spend my mental energy on that either. So it's really about just creating a really safe space and dedicating some time, whether that's weekly or monthly or quarterly, whatever that looks like, whatever your business can allow. It's about setting aside that space and then holding people accountable to saying, okay, what's your idea? And acknowledging them for that idea.
Nice. Is there a standard for you with regard to how long you'll test ideas, or is it kind of dependent on?
It kind of depends on the idea and the potential ROI. So sure. If it's, hey, this is going to help the entire company do this one thing better because I'm fixing this particular issue. Great. Spend some time, work it out, really test it. I'm not rolling it out to everybody until we know it works. If it's, well, this will help our team do this small thing, then it's okay. Like spend a couple of weeks, but if it doesn't work, let's move on. Spend time on something else. So really, you have to look at what the potential return is before you know how much you want to put into it.
Perfect. And I can't think of a better person, someone who's come up as a project manager to ask this next question, but how do you prioritize and manage the competing demands on your team?
Yep. So I love this question. It's something I'm pretty proud of what I've done here. I come up with a scoring mechanism, and it is not an exact science. Okay. So we look at 3 or 4 different attributes of any project or any effort that we're going to take on, and we rate it. It's pretty simple, usually 1 to 5. If there is like an actual ROI financial component, there'll be some dollars associated in there. But it really is, you look at these attributes and you're weighting it. And it's a relative scale to help you understand this thing is way more important than this thing. We're putting it towards the bottom of the list. And when it's at the bottom, then we know if this thing up here needs resources, needs money, needs attention, that will always come first. Creating just a simple scoring mechanism to help your entire team. Like I use it with our entire executive team, creating that kind of scale to set some expectations so that they're really clear on what priority is key. And again, not an exact science. There are things on there we're rating 1 to 5, and it's not like I've put a whole methodology behind what 3 versus 2 means. It means that we're looking at relative to the rest of it, where should we put this?
Adrienne, that is so cool. I didn't know that. And that I can imagine there's going to be some people either watching in real time or after the fact who are hearing that and saying, wow, there's a person I want to be my mentor, so I can dig in and learn a little bit more about that system. That's incredible. Really cool. Is that something that you developed at Supplemental, or is that something you've had for some time now?
I have done versions of this in different teams. The version I have here is unique to Supplemental for sure. The other scales that I've used in other places, Amex, we had an exhaustive project list, and my former leader and I, who was later a mentor of mine, she and I came up with a scale to rate things. And so I knew how this should work. I'd done it on other teams right after Amex, just trying to prioritize our own work on team. Limited success, such a small audience, but for something at the scale of like, hey, you have your entire portfolio of work. How do we pare this down? What does that look like? It's been key. That's been key.
Very cool. Very, very cool. All right. So just a couple of more things. I know you're busy, so I'll let you get back to it. But if you could, if you could go back in time and give it, and I know this wasn't that long ago. All right, to be clear, but if you could go back in time to your 25-year-old self and give one piece of advice, what would it be?
Are you just trying to make us feel better because we graduated the same year? So you're like, it wasn't that long ago.
100%. 100%.
Okay, my piece of advice is to listen to your instincts. Like, know when it's time for a change. Don't let fear own you. Like, there is that little, whatever it is, that little pull on your hair that's telling you like, hey, you should go do that. Or, hey, this is not the right thing for you to do. Trusting your instincts, at least for me, when I don't, 90% of the time I regret it. I look back and think, oh, I wasted time in that situation, or, oh, I should have moved faster, or, oh, I really shouldn't have done that. I shouldn't have volunteered for that thing. So just really kind of making sure that you're touching base with yourself and listening to that. And if it's off for some reason, questioning why that is. Like, what is it around you that's throwing you off? Because you really should kind of know what's going to be good for you. You'll start to get a feel for what feels organic in your career, and trying to go against that to a point where it's holding you back is not the right thing. So if I were to go backwards, it would be trust your instincts. Don't be scared of them. Just go. And it'll lead you to things that you're not comfortable with, but it will help you long term.
That's a good thing here. Back to this theme of becoming comfortable, being uncomfortable, right?
Yes,
that's how you grow.
Exactly. Yep.
Very cool. Very cool. Okay. All right. I'll resist the temptation to lead my interviewee here on this next question. So what advancements, trends do you anticipate will kind of shape industry in general in the coming years?
Yeah, I mean, I think this one, you'll probably get the same answer a million times for the next little while, but generative AI and large language models are it. And if you don't understand how to use them, I think that you'll just end up in a space where you're far behind. What's going to really distinguish different orgs is their ability to adapt and figure out how to utilize them in the appropriate way. And I think long term, you'll want to anticipate what that looks like, and how I think some of it will bring us back to face. And what I mean by that is, like, let's take recruiting. If you are recruiting and you can build your resume as a person that wants to be recruited, and you can have AI also sort that resume and screen your candidates, eventually the thing that will distinguish your company is how good your face-to-face interaction will be, right? You can only go so far. So I think anticipating this is how we're going to use it. Here's the models that we're going to, go after. And then understanding, how do I get one step ahead of that, and what's going to differentiate us in the end? Those are the things that I think are going to be the trend in innovation for the next 10 years.
Well, call it confirmation bias, but I tend to agree with you with regard to what ultimately will differentiate, organizations, and for that matter, people, are going to be the soft skills, the ability to communicate, in person. Yes. I really do think that that's going to be absolutely critical. But to your point, no surprises on what you mentioned about about trends. Having said that, how do you keep up with the latest trends and innovations out there?
Yeah, I mean, I do read quite a bit. I think my Apple News subscription's a well used. I've used every cent of that every month. I read a lot. Podcasts are killer. HBR has some great ones. And then depending on which industry you're in, definitely a lot of good podcasts out there you have to filter out. But you can do that while you're cooking, reading, walking the dogs, whatever. That's pretty easy. And then I do find events where I can, like there have been a couple of really cool, like lunch and learn kind of events in Salt Lake here, or anywhere where I'm seeing like, okay, somebody interesting is going to speak. How do I get there? And I don't, honestly, I don't have a ton of time, right? Not all of us can just leave the office for 2 hours at a time, but I try and make some time if I find something really interesting.
Cool. Are there any organizations that you'd recommend for people that are watching this?
For particularly to looking at AI or just innovation in general?
Well, yeah, just innovation in general. And honestly, not even that, because oftentimes I'll find that sometimes it's surprising events that where you can pick up a lot of value. So it certainly doesn't even have to be specific to innovation or for that matter, AI, just events that or organizations that you think people should take a look at and perhaps, see what's on the docket for upcoming speaking events.
I don't think I have a great place, like a single place I always go to that I find it's a little more random. What I will say is that for the professional networking groups that I'm in that have to do with project management or executive leadership, whatever that looks like on LinkedIn or personally outside of that, they usually will have little nuggets that will say, hey, you're in this field, we're discussing what ChatGPT does in this field. And I think that those are the little nuggets that I find. So it's just, even if I'm not professionally networking, like actively out in the world, virtually, I belong to a bunch of groups and I try and find what they're doing and how they're speaking to things.
Perfect. I love that. That's great and actionable advice. Well, Adrienne, it's no surprise as both an executive and an expert in project management that, we came in under half an hour here. Anything that we didn't cover that you'd like to discuss before I let you jump?
No, I appreciated your questions. Thank you for the time. If there's anything that we want to follow up with, please let me know.
I appreciate that. And again, for those of you who have either been here watching real time or watching, after the fact, if you have questions, feel free to post them in the comment section. I'll make sure that Adrienne sees them. But you thanked me for my time. Are you kidding me? Thank you so much for your time, for doing this, for the value that I know this is going to bring to the technology community. So I can't thank you enough, Adrienne. It was really fun. And I think you're right. We should definitely do this again at some point.
Okay, sounds good. Thanks, Scotty.
All right, you got it. All right, thanks everybody for joining. See ya.